Now then, hobbyists, I doubt I will ever understand the random logic that Tamiya applies to whether or not they will include a driver figure in its models. I like them, and I think that they add a good way to personalise the vehicle, especially if you are planning to go down the box art route. When I get around to upgrading my lunchbox, I will be looking at finding a figure to add as a driver, but regardless, it's time to put together and paint the driver's head or helmet for my Tamiya Terra Scorcher build. Looking at the parts tree more closely, we can see the helmet comes in 3 pieces: front, back and the little peg joiner piece. This is where you would also attach it to the body. At this point, I'm not too certain what the 3 washers are for. Fingers crossed that they weren't too important for this stage. As you can also see, there's a blooming big hole in the back of the helmet, so we'll probably have to use some model fillet on this as well. But I will go through the process. First thing first, technically stage 40 first, as this build might not overly be in order, but I'm sure I will end up with a car of some sorts. Anyway, the first job we need to do is remove the pieces from the part tree. The advice here is cut the items off the tree generously. The reason is you can always cut more off, but you can't put more on. I use a small set of cutters. As they are slightly curved, it's the ideal tool for the job. Just give it a snip with plenty of spur remaining. We will need to sand the helmet before painting, so we can work on tidying up the spurs later on. Also, another great tip is try and work in an organised, tidy environment, as parts are small and they can ping off if you're not careful. The only other part needed for what I am building today is a BC5 screw from parts bag C. I had hoped not to start opening the parts bags just yet, as I won't be starting the main build of the car for a couple of weeks, but I don't have any of these spare from previous builds. What is particularly helpful is that at the back of the instructions it lists all the items in the bags, and if you measure the screw with the diagram it should match up, so you can easily identify the one that's needed. I picked these up for free from an amusement arcade in Rill. You may have seen this in a previous video, which I'll try and link here. The reason I thought these would come in handy is for organisation. As you can see, a multitude of screws, washers and nuts for everything around in bags is not ideal. Also, there's nothing wrong with a bit of upcycling, as you don't need state-of-the-art tools, and there's a cost-effective, if slightly hillbilly method that can get you by. Once all the bits and bobs have been accumulated, it's a good idea to piece it together, just to make sure it fits. This shows how it will look. Yes, currently it still has its spurs on, but that will also show where you have to sand and fill later on. Now, at this stage I will be using a modelling scalpel to clean the helmet off. These are sharp, and if you are not confident with a knife, then please remember to cut away from yourself. Skills like this do take time, as my hands are covered in scars from Airfix and Warhammer modelling from when I was younger. It is easy for a knife to slip if not careful, so trying to predict where the blade will go will help. And if anywhere near your hands, please be careful, as I'm sure jobs like this will be much more difficult if you lose a finger. The other element that will help is making sure the blade is as sharp can be, as a dull blade will create more harm than good. What I find helps is a couple of little drops of super glue can help keep the helmet together to make putting the screw in far easier. One day I intend to get myself the Tamiya screwdriver set, but as I said earlier, as long as you have a couple of essential tools you can get by. And I'm sure there's better modelling screwdrivers out there. Comment below on ones that you recommend. After the screw is in, we can see the helmet and what we are working with. A good sand around the seam is needed, and we also need to sort out with modelling putty the big gaping hole in his head. For this I will be using Humbrol model filler, mainly as this was the only one that they had in stock in Hobbycraft. It's best to put a little bit on something and apply it to the model, rather than applying directly. This is so you can give it a good mix and it makes it more pliable. A little does go a long way, so don't be shy when applying. As I will sand this back, it's best to add some and then add a little bit more if building up an area, because it will help it dry more quickly. And we will be sanding this back to make it smooth, and it is the best way to hide the seams and fill the giant hole in the back of his head. Drying time was around an hour. It really depends on the thickness, and after a sanding it's ready for an undercoat. As my nearest RC shop is not local in any way, and as much as I can buy Tamiya undercoat online, it's considered a hazardous product. The postage and packaging usually works out more than the paint itself. So we went to Hobbycraft again, and I had to buy the Humbrol one. They did have 16 aisles of cake decorating nonsense though. Some might say that you can simply run a Sharpie over it and bosh, there you are, a driver figure. This is one way of doing it, but if you're spending time and money on a project, why not pay some extra attention to the driver? The best way to tackle this is to paint the skin tone first. Also, don't be afraid to mix the paint to your liking. Next, we'll be working on the eyes. Remember not to use bright white, as this will make it look bug-eyed. And also when adding the pupil, try and put it in the top 2/3 of the eye, as this will make it look a lot more natural. Next up is the balaclava. As the protective mask is not bright white, and as much as the primer is grey, I wanted it to be more of an off-white. So again, I mix a little bit of the black and silver to the white to get the look I want. I find a few drops of Tamiya thinners, X20A, makes the paint go a lot further and stays wet on the palette, but still dries effectively on the model, and it gives you the extra time to have a faff without worrying about watching paint dry. As much as I am looking for a striking appearance for my driving figure, as an amateur, perfection is a long way off, but good lighting and a nice small bristled brush can help here. I try to rest my arms on the desk for stability, but as I am made up of 65% caffeine, my hands are not as steady as a rock. So this is where patience can help, and as long as you plan where the brush will be going, you should be fine. Steadily moving forwards, the skin, eyes and mask are looking hot to trot, so it's time to do the edging. I am doing the helmet in purple and green, and the purple is the only colour I am using that I have not mixed, but I still put a few drops of Tamiya thinners onto the palette, as well as a few drops of the paint, as painting out of the bottle creates more mess and issues than it solves. Once the purple edging is dry, it's time to add the colour. This can be done with a rattle can or an airbrush to get a really good finish, but to do this you would have to mask off the painted part you have done already. As you may be able to see, I chose to put it on by brush, but I think the finish looks good. I may throw some TS80 flat clear on it just to give it a nice sheen though. As much as I've waffled on about this is what I have ended up with. Practice will help, and I hope the next one will be even better. Okay, he may be ever so slightly boz-eyed, but let's be realistic, this will be inside a 1/10 scale car, which will be whizzing past around 30 miles an hour, so there should be no real time for scrutiny, but I think the objective has been completed. The next job will be to start the car build. I think I have all the parts, apart from the motor. I will also make sure to document painting the body, as I will be going with box art, but with a twist. To make sure you don't miss this or any of the future content, please remember to like and subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment. But for now, that's your lot.